Imagine you are a pilot of a B-17 Flying Fortress. Your behemoth, a veritable flying citadel with a dozen machine guns, is proudly soaring over Germany in late 1944. You've almost grown accustomed to attacks by German fighters. Messerschmitt's Focke-Wulfs, they approach from the side, from behind. Their swift silhouettes are familiar. But what is that? The radio operator shouts about a high-speed contact. Too high. It doesn't resemble any known aircraft. It doesn't approach from the tail, doesn't attack from the flank. It simply catches up to you in a straight line, swiftly, relentlessly like a phantom. In a few seconds, a tiny dot on the horizon transforms into a strange, arrow-like silhouette, streaks past at a speed that takes your breath away, and vanishes just as swiftly, leaving you in bewilderment and with a chill in your stomach. You have just encountered something that should not exist. You saw a phantom of the Third Reich, the Dornier Do 335 Pfeil, the arrow, and you were very lucky that on that day, it did not open fire. Friends, if you love stories about forgotten weapons, engineering geniuses, and turning points in history, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and most importantly, write in the comments. What do you think? Could this aircraft have truly changed the course of the air war had it appeared a year earlier? Your opinion is priceless to me. Prologue: A birth from the ashes of Versailles. To understand the phenomenon of the arrow, you cannot just look at its technical specifications. You must immerse yourself in the unique and grim laboratory where it was born, Germany between the two world wars. After defeat in the First World War, the country was bound hand and foot by the Treaty of Versailles. This was not merely a peace treaty. It was a document designed to deprive Germany of the ability to wage large-scale wars for decades to come. It was forbidden to have tanks, heavy artillery, a submarine fleet, and, most importantly for our story, a military air force. It seemed straightforward. German aircraft were no longer supposed to fly. But this is where things got interesting. German engineers and the military did not accept this. They began to look for loopholes, circumventing the prohibitions with jeweler-like, almost scholastic precision. Combat aircraft were forbidden? Fine. We will build passenger planes, mail planes, sport planes. And they built them. Junkers, Dornier, Heinkel. Their machines crisscrossed the skies of Europe, accumulating invaluable experience, training pilots and designers. It was a giant flying school, disguised for peaceful purposes. Developing heavy bombers was forbidden, and who said our huge three-engine plane was a bomber? It's a transport aircraft for carrying mail. Or even more cunning, a high-altitude anti-aircraft mount. Yes, you heard that right. The famous 88, the 88mm anti-aircraft guns, the most fearsome anti-tank guns of the Second World War, were initially designed precisely as anti-aircraft guns, which were not prohibited. This spirit of circumvention, this intellectual karate against restrictions, became part of the DNA of the German military-industrial complex. And in this environment, in this hothouse of forced inventiveness, the talent of Claudius Dornier blossomed. He was not just an engineer. He was a visionary, a stubborn man who believed in the power of unconventional solutions. Back during the First World War, he worked for the famous Ferdinand von Zeppelin and became enamored with the idea of large flying boats. After the war, when Germany was forbidden to build large military aircraft, Dornier found a way out. He built giant flying boats for civilian airlines. His Do-X, a true Leviathan with 12 engines, was a marvel of technology. And it was on such projects that Dornier honed his favorite scheme, the tandem arrangement of engines. To avoid drenching the fuselage with water during takeoff and landing, he placed the engines not on the wings, but one behind the other on a high pylon, one pulling, the other pushing. This idea became his obsession, his engineering philosophy. The years passed. The Nazis came to power in Germany. The Versailles restrictions were cast aside as unnecessary trash. It would seem that now one could create without looking back. But no, the spirit of ingenuity did not go away. Now, it was directed not at circumventing the treaty, but solving purely technical problems. And the main problem for a fighter or high-speed bomber in those years was aerodynamics. The higher the speed, the more drag the air creates. The conventional scheme with two engines on the wings created a lot of sail area. What if this problem was eliminated? What if they made an aircraft projectile maximally clean from an aerodynamic point of view? And this is where Dornier pulled an old, proven idea from his engineering portfolio. In 1937, he formally patented an aircraft with two engines arranged in tandem along the fuselage. One, in the nose, with a pulling propeller. The second, in the tail, with a pushing one. The pilot sits between them, like the filling in a sandwich, protected on all sides by metal and armor. It was a genius move. Such an aircraft had minimal frontal drag and could develop monstrous speed using the same power as its wing competitors. The concept of the Aero was born. Engineering madness. How to assemble a starfighter in a shed. Imagine the reaction of a conventional aviation engineer in 1942 to the blueprints of the Do 335. It was shock. Everything about it was wrong. Aviation relied on traditions, on proven solutions, and here, sheer heresy. 1. Two engines, one problem. The heart of the Aero was to be two 12-cylinder liquid-cooled Daimler-Benz DB603 engines. The power of each was about 1,800 horsepower. Imagine this energy. But how to synchronize the operation of two engines spaced along the length of the aircraft? These weren't two engines on a wing working symmetrically. This required long shafts, complex clutch couplings, synchronizers. If anything went wrong, disaster was inevitable. The tail engine was a novelty in itself. How to service it? How to cool it? It's in the tail, where airflow was limited. 2. The problem of pilot rescue. This is perhaps the most dramatic element of the design. The pilot sits between two propellers. In front, a huge three-bladed propeller spinning at a furious speed. Behind, the same. In case of an accident or the need to bail out, the standard solution, to jump with a parachute, was tantamount to suicide. The pilot would inevitably be sucked back and ground up in the tail propeller. Dornier's engineers found a solution worthy of science fiction. The world's first serial ejection seat. But that's not all. Before ejecting, the pilot had to activate a system for the emergency jettisoning of the tail propeller and the upper fin. Special pyrotechnic charges literally blew off the propeller blades and the stabilizer, clearing a path for the pilot to escape. It was an incredibly complex and risky procedure, but it worked. It turned the aircraft from a death trap into a machine that offered a chance for life. 3. Landing gear and armament. Even a landing gear of the Aero was unusual, a tricycle configuration with a nose wheel. For Germany of that era, this was a rarity. Most aircraft had a tail wheel. And the armament? To avoid complicating the synchronization of firing through the disc of the rotating propeller, the engineers came up with a clever thing. The 30mm Mk 103 cannon fired through the hollow shaft of the nose engine's gearbox. It was a shot through the heart of the machine, plus two 15mm cannons in the nose. No other aircraft had such a concentration of firepower on its centerline. The pilot simply aimed the entire aircraft at the target and pressed the trigger. A deadly volley flew precisely along the course. The assembly of the first prototypes resembled an alchemical process. It was, in a literal sense, the creation of something new from nothing, under conditions of growing chaos. The Allies bombed German factories day and night. Production was scattered across small workshops, hidden in forests. There was a shortage of workers, resources were dwindling. And in this hell, on the 26th of October, 1943, the first prototype, Do 335E1, piloted by a test pilot, rose into the sky over the airfield in Mengen. Eyewitnesses later recalled that it was not just a flight. It was a spectacle. A long, arrow-like fuselage, an unusually loud, double roar of the engines. The aircraft didn't just take off. It tore off the ground and began to gain speed with such ferocity that it took the spectators' breath away. It wasn't supposed to fly like that. It was too heavy, too strange. But it flew. and it was faster than anything the Allied aviation could offer at that moment. Test pilots who flew the machine agreed on one thing. At altitude, with both engines running, it was the fastest piston-powered aircraft in the world. Its speed exceeded 760 kilometers per hour. It was faster than British Spitfires, faster than American Mustangs. It was almost as fast as the first jet aircraft. Politics and the curse of versatility, why the Aero was never adopted. And here begins the real tragedy, a classic one for totalitarian regimes mired in bureaucracy and internal power struggles. The brilliant machine became a hostage to three fatal factors. First factor, Adolf Hitler and his obsession with retribution. By 1944, the Führer was less and less interested in defense. His mind was occupied with one thing: revenge. The Allies were bombing German cities? That means we will bomb them. From this sprang the manic idea of the Schnellbomber, a high-speed bomber that could raid England with impunity. When Hitler was presented with the Do-335, he did not see a fighter interceptor capable of defending the Reich skies from armadas of B-17s. He saw a perfect carrier for a single bomb. "Excellent," he must have exclaimed. "It's fast, they won't catch it. Convert into a bomber." And despite the objections of engineers and pilots, the Aero was butchered, trying to make it into something it wasn't primarily designed for. Precious time was spent reworking bomb bays instead of putting the fighter into mass production. Second factor, the war of budgets and ambitions. The Aero had a powerful competitor, the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first mass-produced jet fighter. Behind it stood Willy Messerschmitt, a genius engineer and, more importantly, a brilliant courtier who knew how to lobby for his interests. The jet theme was fashionable, promising. It captured the imagination. The piston-powered Do-335, for all its speed, seemed archaic in comparison to the Schwalbe Swallow. Why do we need the fastest piston aircraft if we have a jet? That's what many in the Luftwaffe leadership thought. A struggle for resources began, for steel, for aluminum, for engines. The Me-262 often won this struggle. Third factor, the curse of the universal soldier. This is perhaps the bitterest irony. The Do-335 was so good that they tried to make it everything at once. Fighter bomber? Yes. Night fighter? Of course. We'll just install a heavy Liechtenstein radar with non-retractable antennas that negated all its speed advantages. Reconnaissance plane? Why not? Let's stick aerial cameras here. Anti-tank, attack aircraft? Let's try to fit a 55mm cannon. Each such modification required time, effort, and redesign. As a result, not a single variant was perfected. The Germans, known for their love of specialization, fell into the trap of universality with the Do-335. They created a Swiss Army knife when they urgently needed a sharp scalpel. While these endless debates and modifications were going on, the sky over Germany was becoming increasingly hostile. Allied armadas dominated the air. Factories lay in ruins. Fuel had become a luxury in short supply. The combat deployment that never was, phantoms on the runway. There is virtually no reliable data on the combat sorties of the Do-335. This is one of the biggest mysteries of this aircraft. We know that by March 1945, only about 37 to 39 machines of various modifications have been assembled. A handful of these aircraft were transferred to the I/KGJ 262 Training and Combat Unit, where pilots who had flown bombers were retrained to fly fighters. One can only imagine what a shock the transition to this powerful, complex, and willful machine was for them. Some sources mention that one or two Do-335s may have been used on reconnaissance flights. Their speed indeed allowed them to escape any enemy fighters. But the Aeros never truly rose en masse to defend their sky. The most symbolic episode occurred in April 1945, when American troops occupied the airbase at Oberpfaffenhofen. Among the abandoned equipment, they found several nearly intact Do-335s. One of them, a Do-335A0, stood on the runway with full tanks and prepared weapons. It was ready for battle. but there was no pilot in its cockpit. The war had ended for it without ever having begun. It was the perfect weapon, late for its own war. The Allies, having obtained the trophies, studied them greedily. American and French test pilots flew the Arrow. Their reviews were mixed. Everyone admired the speed, the power of the armament, the well-thought-out ergonomics of the cockpit. But they also complained about the complexity of control, the vibrations, the unreliability of the tail engine, which overheated. The French crashed several machines in accidents, never fully able to tame this iron horse. The aircraft required the highest pilot qualification, and under peacetime conditions and with a shortage of spare parts, no one wanted to take risks. The Arrow that flew past its time. After the war, the fate of the surviving Arrows varied. One of them was carefully studied, taken apart bolt by bolt, and eventually reassembled. Today, this unique surviving Do 335A0 stands silently in a hangar at the National Air and Space Museum of the United States at the Smithsonian Institution. It does not fly. It just stands, long, arrow-like, formidable, and silent. It is a monument, but not to Nazism or war. It is a monument to engineering thought, a monument to audacity, stubbornness, and that tragic fork in the road where aviation found itself in the middle of the 20th century. The famous British test pilot Eric Winkelbrown, who flew more than 480 types of aircraft, gave one of the most accurate and poignant descriptions of the Do 335. It was 5 years ahead of its time, and it was 5 years too late. This phrase contains the whole essence of the Arrow. It was ahead because its engineering solutions, the tandem layout, the ejection seat, the axial placement of armament, the clean aerodynamics, became the standard for the aviation of the future. Look at post-war aircraft like the American F-86 Sabre or the French Mirages. You will see the same striving for a clean fuselage, for the concentration of power and armament along the center line. But it was late because it was born in a moment when piston aviation was already singing its swan song. Jet engines were taking the stage. They were simpler, cheaper to produce, and opened up a fundamentally different path of development. The Jet Me-262 did not have complex shafts and synchronizers. It simply burned kerosene and ejected a stream of hot gases. It was a more direct path to speed. The Do 335 became the swan song of piston aviation, its final, most powerful, and most perfect chord. It was the limit, the ceiling beyond which it was impossible to jump on pistons. It was an attempt to outrun the war itself, to outrun time. But time is the most elusive opponent. It cannot be caught, even on the fastest arrow. So that's the story. A story of genius, stubbornness, and the bitter irony of fate. What do you think, friends? If Hitler hadn't interfered and Dornier had been given carte blanche back in 1943, could it have changed the course of the air war? Or was the fate of the Arrow predetermined by the inevitable advent of the jet age? Write your versions and opinions in the comments. Let's discuss. And of course, if you found this interesting, support the channel, subscribe, like, share this story with friends. There are many more untold stories ahead.